Great to be here this morning with all of you. Just curious, how many of you are classroom teachers? Great. Building level administrators, including principals. System level administrators, including superintendents and board members. Great. How many don't know who you are? There you go. The knowledge revolution. We have a lot of discussions today about our current circumstance. I'm going to take you in a journey towards the future. What I'm not going to provide you with today is some magical solution or a finite picture of that future. What I hope to provide you with this morning are some questions that you're going to think about through this conference and as you go back home. And those questions are critically important because what I don't know this morning is your circumstance. I don't know where you're at. I don't know where you're headed. But I do know there are critical questions all of us can ask ourselves as we pursue that future we believe will most benefit the children under our care. So to begin with, I want to provide some definitions so that we have some common understanding of how I'm defining this. First is the knowledge revolution. The big key to the knowledge revolution, and we're moving in this direction, from producing things to adding value by creating and using knowledge. The supply chain, which Pam mentioned, and we joke about with the toilet paper, the supply chain, the impact and the disruptions to our supply chains will never be restored back to what they were. That disruption is permanent. What will happen is where are they headed with, what are the new supply chains and how are they managed in the future? Our kids, think about it, especially kids in elementary school, are we continue to ask them to produce things? Ask kids as they go further, and they're high school kids, and as I talk with kids, the one thing they're bored about school is all you're asking us to do is produce something that we can Google. Share with you what we already know, you know the answer to. All I got to do is Google and give you the answer, and boom, I get an A. What they want to do is engage in problem solving. They want to create knowledge. Sometimes that knowledge is uncomfortable. Sometimes that knowledge shows up on a TikTok or a Snapchat. But they're into the creation mode. There's a lot of energy around that. Sometimes it's productive and sometimes it's unproductive. But the bottom line is they're creating. They're creating new knowledge. Which goes to the knowledge worker. Is someone who can learn and adapt to a shifting workplace. That's critically important. We have a whole generation of work that is in its last stages, that is going to be taken over, as I'll share with you, through automation, robotics, because it's basic work that gets repeated every day, the same thing, over and over again. In the knowledge revolution, that level of work is going to disappear. But new work and new demands on the skills of those workers are going to appear. And the kids who are in your elementary schools right now will be the first generation of kids who will be the first ones to graduate as knowledge workers. Their employment is dependent upon that. Because the jobs that they're going to pursue haven't been created. Probably 70% of the jobs they're going to pursue have not been created. So how do you prepare a second grader today for a future where they don't know what job they're going to hold or jobs, what career they're going to pursue, and the likelihood those careers and those jobs haven't even been defined. It's one of the most exciting things about being an educator, is preparing kids for an uncertain future. Preparing kids so they can pursue their dreams, whatever they may be. We've gone through the age of information, and we're near the final stages of it. And we're rich with data. And we can take the same data set and form significantly different bodies of information around that data set. And it's also one of the troubling aspects of the conversations that go on in the world today. Just look at, as Pam mentioned earlier, mass, the data around mass. You can put 10 people in a room, they can look at the same data set, and they can create their own sets of information, gathering that data, synthesizing it, analyzing it, and tell a different story around whether masks are beneficial, and be convincing of their viewpoint. It reminds me of when I was a former physics and math teacher. Einstein's theory of relativity, one of the basic elements of it is we could be standing at an intersection, 4 of us, and each one of us are in a different corner. And a car accident happens in the middle of the intersection. All 4 of us will provide our own account for what we saw happen. And we'll provide 4 different accounts of the same circumstance. Not one of us is absolutely right. In fact, all 4 of us have a piece of the absolute truth. What happens, though, in the world today is we don't share those perspectives in a way to try to unify them to get the one perspective that's accurate, because it's a collection of those. But the knowledge revolution is going to push people to go beyond just being informed about taking data sets to frame your opinion, because the knowledge revolution is demanding more than just a sharing of our opinions. It's demanding problem solving, conflict resolution, creating knowledge based on an integration of information and data to solve a problem. This knowledge revolution needs to be reflected in the work we do. Think about competency-based education. The system itself is set up beautifully to be adaptive and agile to the increased value on knowledge, provided we continue to evolve our definition of what it means to be competent. Because competency in 2021 will be different in 2031. As long as we continue to adapt our definition of competency and evolve it so that our kids are pushing forward, that system will provide the one pathway. I'm not going to say that it's the only pathway, but it's a reliable pathway provided we allow it to evolve with us and with our kids. How many of you are old enough, and probably half of us are, remember the Jetsons? Right? If you want to have some fun, Google the Jetsons and find a YouTube video. And the YouTube video is about the Jetsons 50 years later. And the video takes elements of the Jetsons and says how much of it came true 50 years later. It's a fun little exercise. It's about a 8 or 9 minute video. A lot of it came true. Now, how many of you, when you were 16 and you learned how to drive a car, thought of a world in which we would be developing autonomous driving cars, that would drive without a driver? How many thought that that would be a world? This world of robotics is emerging right before our eyes. And what you can imagine is actually closer to reality than you think. Chances are the kids in elementary school, when they are adults and have a family, they will have access to and probably have a robot in their home. And that robot will do everyday household chores, from cleaning, Jane's going to love this one, cooking, ordering the groceries, keeping stock of everything. It's true. They're working on it right now. Think about a world with robots. I was in a reception with a few governors and state chiefs and some of us, and there's a lady who probably was about 10 years older than I am, asked a governor from Montana, Steve Bullock, what are we going to do about all these robots that are going to take over jobs? Was her question. And I'm like, where's this coming from? This was about 4 years ago. And it got me on this whole thing about really looking at where we are with robotics. Steve gave a great answer, but just like computers, When we first saw the generation of computers coming up, we said, that's going to take over people's jobs. People are going to be out of work. What did the computer industry do? Yes, it replaced some jobs, but it created far greater number of jobs than it replaced, than it eliminated. The same thing's going to happen with robotics. I was in Missouri Sunday night, checking in, and I spoke at a principals conference in Missouri on Monday morning. And it took me 3 hours to check into the hotel. It was a Holiday Inn in Columbia, Missouri. 3 hours. When I got to the hotel parking lot, I was struck by there was a line going outside the hotel to check into the hotel. And thankfully for technology, because right around that time was kickoff for the Tampa Bay New England Patriots football game. I sat in my car and watched the first 3 quarters on my phone, waiting to check into this hotel. Why? They're understaffed. They didn't have enough people. They had jobs there. They've been posting and trying to hire for people to clean rooms. They are understaffed to have people check in. And this isn't an isolated case. Across industries in this country, there are jobs that are going unfilled. And it's hit in the service industry, it's hit in the supply chain industry, to a point that those jobs are not going to all of a sudden be filled. People have rejected those jobs for a number of reasons. But what's going to happen is these jobs are going to be automated. The problem is that future isn't here fast enough. So we're going to deal with a very disruptive period for a number of years, where you're going to find situations like I faced Sunday night will happen. And you know, I got into the hotel, I couldn't be upset. I mean, the people were, I just felt bad for the 2 women who were trying to deal with all of this and had no help. They were working, I mean, they worked all through the night just to catch up with that. And it wasn't a large hotel, it was a Holiday Inn. So there are going to be 3 phases, and we're in parts of each of these phases right now. There are 3 phases toward this robotics and automation innovation. The first phase is an algorithm wave. And an algorithm says, I can get a robot to do the same thing. There's an algorithm I write will do the same thing repeatedly over and over again with consistency and reliability and high degree of quality. That's in our manufacturing plants. It exists today. And it's going to affect every sector, and some sectors more so than others. The second one, augmentation wave. And you deal with it right now using, how many of you use Siri? How many use the commands in your car through that? I'm still trying to, you know, the tendency is I want to go push a button rather than, and just have, turn the dial or something like that, when I can actually just say, go here, or call here. In the augmentation wave, if you give the right command, the computer or the robot knows how to respond, but you have to follow a certain cadence and a certain language in order for that to happen. These 2 waves, we have a lot of examples right now we experience every single day. In some cases, we don't even realize it. The third wave is the autonomy wave, where you will have a conversation with a robot that can be wide-ranging. You don't have to stick to a certain cadence or command. They can interpret the inflection of your voice. They can interpret the range of data that you're providing. They can problem solve. That's the wave that's going to hit our households in 20 years, where you can have a robot who handles all of the household responsibilities. Go back to the Jetsons. Go to other, you know, how many of you are Star Wars fans? What is it, R2-D2, right? That future is not far-fetched. It's this autonomy wave that is going to significantly impact work. But it's going to create the need for knowledge workers. Because creating these robots, maintaining these robots, enacting and directing these robots and serving them, it will change. Yes, you may not have individual humans going around hotel rooms cleaning in the future, but there's going to be a knowledge worker managing the robots who do. And it'll probably be a whole staff. Think about the technology that will be necessary. You know, I used to, when I was younger, I would change the oil in my car or figure out something in my car. Today, I don't even try. The computer systems that operate our cars are very sophisticated. So I recently got a car, and there was something wrong. The engine light came on, so I go to the dealer that I bought the car, and somebody out of the, one of the mechanics comes out with a handheld device, not much bigger than my phone. Goes up to the car, pushes a couple buttons. Oh, you got a spark plug that's misfiring. We're going to need the car for a day. We'll take care of it. That happened within 3 minutes. 10 years ago, they would have spent 3 hours just diagnosing what the problem was, running a series of tests. I got to do this test, I got to do that test. In 3 minutes, he knew exactly what needed to be done by a handheld device. It's this movement that is creating a new generation of skills that our kids need, that our current employees need to do their work, and is being driven by job automation and robotics. This is the top 10 skills, the Future of Jobs report. And in 5 years, this is a pretty dramatic shift just in 5 years. Look at the importance of creativity. It went from 10 in 2015 to 3. It's a significant shift. 2 dropped out, quality control and active listening. Emotional intelligence, which active listening is part of emotional intelligence, became a significant new entry. And here's the one that is going to define the future of our kids as they go into work. Cognitive flexibility. Cognitive flexibility. Think about that skill when it comes to conflict resolution, problem solving, being creative. And think about the way you instruct in your classrooms. Are we nurturing cognitive flexibility or cognitive recall? Cognitive flexibility starts with us as educators in the way we approach the learning process, the way we approach our instructional processes. We must also model cognitive flexibility, which means entering into, for instance, studying something where you don't know the answer. You're not sure what the solution is, or having to give problems where there might be multiple solutions that are all valid, and being able to determine what's the best solution. Or having the cognitive flexibility to say, you know what? There are multiple and each one works. How many of us classroom teachers, and I was a math teacher where there was one answer. You know, a physics teacher where there was one, and back then it was like you had to follow the same procedure to get to that answer. Cognitive flexibility says, no, not necessarily. So ensuring preparedness for the future, and this is where I think CBE sets up beautifully. Knowledge acquisition and application, skill attainment and performance, knowledge and skills. Here's the rub, and I know some of you are from other states, and I don't want to get off on this tangent, but our state summative large-scale assessment systems are actually counterproductive to ensuring preparedness for the future. Here's why. And it's also impacting our ability to scale really good solutions like CBE, because that system demands uniformity. It demands it reinforces a time-based system of education rather than time being the constant, where in CBE, learning is the constant, not time. Time is flexible. We all know that. Any of us who've raised kids, they all learn at different paces, different times. They learn how to read in different times. They learn how to talk, walk, all of that. That's natural evolution of learning for every human at any age. We don't all do it at the same time, in the same way. But our state systems, unfortunately, have set us up to not do what we need to do to prepare kids for the future. Yes, states want to know some sense of comparability on our schools doing their job, but they don't need to test every kid every single year to answer that question. But teachers, parents need to know every day and every moment, are my kids getting prepared for their future? And somewhere along the way, we lost the trust in teachers to be the #1 primary assessor of our kids' capabilities and their preparedness for the future. We lost, and it's part of the problem we have today in all of our institutions. We've lost trust in government, we've lost trust in education, we've lost trust in our medical leaders. And it really is a fundamental flaw in our country right now. It's one of the things that is breaking down communities. But in education, it started a long time ago. And accountability, unfortunately, has contributed to that breakdown in trust. There's no better assessor of our kids' knowledge and capabilities than the two groups of adults who are most close to our kids every single day, parents and teachers. There is no state system that can be created that could adequately measure the growth and learning in our kids and allow systems like CBE to flourish. What states have to do is pull back and really allow local systems of assessment to be identified, to be the drivers of whether or not our kids are growing in their learning, so that we can answer these questions. Are our kids prepared for their future? Are they acquiring the knowledge? What I advise most schools to do is, if you treat the state summative as a minimum threshold, not a maximum, that's not your end goal. Westminster has moved beyond that because they know the state system will be taken care of if they do their job, because what they're expecting of kids each and every day exceeds that of what the state is measuring. But most school systems, public school systems in the country, they see the state as defining the goal in learning. It should not be. This is a policy issue that is beyond this room's conversation today, but it is a fundamental barrier to you moving forward, and you need to understand that as you move forward. So I know there are a lot of classroom teachers here, and when I talk about leadership over the next segment, I'm talking about leading your classroom, leading your school, leading your system. And there's an approach here. You may understand the mechanics of what you want to do, in this particular case with CBE. Understanding those mechanics and getting it done are two different challenges. They're absolutely two different challenges. I'm going to focus less on the mechanics, more on how do I lead into this future. We overuse the word innovation in education and continuous improvement. They actually are not the same thing. They're not synonymous. They're two different things. In education, for the most part, we, through our research, have seen a pretty good track record with schools and systems being able to continuously improve. It's where they're on a pathway and they tinker, and over time it's very iterative, it's very in small bites, it's not significant, it's not disruptive, but there's this gradual improvement. And in the 42 years I've been in education, I believe our educational systems today are better than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And continuous improvement is one of the major reasons why. However, true innovation is rare because it's disruptive, it's very difficult. You ask your parents, and your parents will commonly say to you, yes, I want our schools to do better. I just don't want them to change. What was good for me should be good for my child. And when you try to be disruptive, you run into a significant series of roadblocks. Westminster has been disruptive, and I'll get to why they were able to successfully disrupt. But to be disruptive, it's innovation you're trying to create the space for it, to have the culture to support it, and some other factors which I'll get into shortly. But schools and systems that can innovate and at the same time continuously improve some other factors become very dynamic. It's the balance of those two that is a rare combination. But most of you are in schools and systems that actually do quite well on continuous improvement. It will be little or no change over time, but improvement on what you're doing and how you're doing it. We are about to announce, and we actually have announced our new standards. We are moving in a direction to measure, based on a study of over 30,000 schools over the last 5 years, what are the 4 key characteristics of a good school? And I'm constantly been asked in my entire career, what differentiates a good school from a struggling school? There are 4 key characteristics of a good school. First, are kids engaged in the learning process? Productively, authentically engaged in the learning process. Second, do you have evidence that they're growing in their learning? And I'm not talking about state tests here. Do you have local evidence that kids are growing in their learning? You can show that those kids are moving in that right direction. Third, leadership for learning. Leadership is a collective. It's not the principal. Leadership for learning in this description is kids' leadership for their learning, teachers, parents, administrators, school board members, is their leadership for learning. And their focus is on learning. And last is a healthy culture for learning. One of the things that has impressed me about Westminster is these 4 characteristics are highly evident. And because these 4 characteristics are highly evident, it sets the stage for them to continue to improve and to innovate. One of the key characteristics that they had, which they needed in order to innovate, was a healthy culture. And within that healthy culture, you can't innovate unless you have a significant culture of trust within your community. And that trust and that culture begins in the boardroom and works it right down to the classroom and into the community. You may have the best idea in the world to innovate, but if you don't have a healthy culture upon which to take on that innovation, it will likely fail. Because you're asking people to accept a dramatic change, a disruptive change. They won't do it unless they trust you, unless they believe in you, unless they have faith in you, unless you have a culture that reinforces it every day, and a culture that will strengthen the struggles with that type of innovation, as well as the successes with that type of innovation. That's really hard for school communities to do, because we have low tolerance for failure. We have low tolerance for things that don't come out really easy. You know, they struggle with doing something and allowing kids to really struggle through their learning. We have low tolerance for that. We want it to be right every time. We're actually very risk averse, yet innovating requires a healthy level of risk. There are 4 levers that leaders have to move their system or their school or their classroom towards a better future. First is that culture thing. And one of the things that is hard to measure, it's measurable, but it's hard to measure. It's ignored too much by state policy and federal policy, the importance of culture in improving schools. It is also one of the most key factors to a leader's effectiveness, because you have more influence on the culture of your classroom, the culture of your school, the culture of your system than anybody else. A teacher has more impact on the culture of his or her classroom than anyone. A principal has more impact on the culture of their school than anyone. And a superintendent has more impact on the culture of the system than anyone. Take that influence carefully. Think about it carefully. And embody what you want your school, system, or classroom to become. And make investments in the culture to become that. Second, you have to have talent. You can't move systems or schools or classes forward without some body of talent. And talent is different than knowledge. You want a talented teacher in every classroom, The reality is you may not have that today, but teachers can grow. But with that group of talented teachers, you can move a school forward. Provided, the third lever, you give them the knowledge. For instance, you may have great teachers with you from Virginia. I love the t-shirts here. So these are 4 teachers I guarantee you're principals right now. You've identified them as a really important talent, a core of talent that you have. Now you want to move to CBE, well, you have to give them the knowledge. They're talented as teachers. Now they need the knowledge to implement and do what you're asking them to do. And they're here to gain that knowledge. And then the fourth lever is you actually have to do it. It's sad to say, virtually every school in America has a school improvement plan. Majority of them don't actually take purposeful action to get that plan done. Anybody here from the state of Michigan? Oh, okay. Okay, good. 2 years ago, before COVID, we were talking with the state leaders. Their average school improvement plan in the state of Michigan is 153 pages long. The average teacher in the state of Michigan has never read their school improvement plan. And I'm not going to ask teachers in the room today, how many of you have actually read word for word your school's improvement plan? Chances are you haven't, and if you had, I'm going to wonder why. We spend every single day writing these plans for the whole year, and we never do anything with them because they're not put in a way that you can implement them. I'll come back to that later. They're a bureaucratic annual exercise that produces, more often than not, anything of substance. And what we spend a lot of time on it. So what is continuous improvement? Going back to that culture thing. We looked at these same schools, came up with this working definition. Continuous improvement is an embedded behavior. It's not a school improvement plan. Continuous improvement is a behavior, which means you're doing something, you're taking action on something that constantly focuses on the conditions, processes, and practices that will improve teaching and learning. When I became a middle school principal generations ago, before some of you probably were even in school, and I looked at this, I was charged with taking from a traditional junior high to a middle school. And I looked at the cadence of the school day, and I determined we're not going to get anywhere as a school until we fix lunch. Putting 400 middle school kids in a lunchroom at one time was a clear definition of insanity. And that was our first school improvement. It wasn't a big, massive plan. I said, until we fix lunch, every single day, the cadence of every single day gets destroyed at lunchtime. And I said, we've got to fix lunch. And they looked at me like, what? I said, no, we've got to fix lunch. And we did. But it's looking at your school. It's continuous improvement. It's a behavior. It's looking at the behaviors within your school, how people interact, the cadence of that day. It's not this massive tactical plan. Traditional planning is obsolete, especially in a world today which is so unpredictable. How do you create a finite plan for a future? Think about, can anybody with certainty tell me what 2026 is going to look like today? Now, especially after the last 2 years, even before then. I know this, the Red Sox will be better than the Yankees in 5 years. But traditional planning, especially in schools, is obsolete. And we began doing this a lot over a decade ago, but scenario planning, where you contemplate a variety of possible futures. You go through an exercise to describe with great clarity each one of those futures. And in that exercise, you start to paint pictures of a potential series of futures. And what happens as you move towards the future, you're going to start to see evidence in one or more of these narratives. And it's going to prepare you to say, we predicted that. We saw that that might happen. What's our response? It helps you be responsive, agile, and adaptive as the future unfolds. Just think about in the world of education. Do you have total control over the environment? Who comes to school each day? If you're in public school, do you have control over the kids that come into your school? Do you have control over who the parents are? Do you have control over who runs for the school board? Do you have control over the funding? But you have to adapt. You have to be agile. Think about it as a classroom teacher, how much control you have and how much control you do not. But you have to be successful. And your agility and your adaptability is critical to your success and effectiveness as a classroom teacher. And so scenario planning has become a very useful tool for us. And we've started to work with boards of education and systems to really start to scenario plan. Because the future is unpredictable. In fact, when it comes to making improvement, you can write on a napkin an impactful improvement plan, on a napkin, one napkin, that can move your school forward dramatically. Provided you take purposeful action, you focus on what are the cultural elements that must be addressed, you have a bond of trust with the community you're trying to make that change with. We need to stop spinning our wheels creating these massive plans that go nowhere, that our teachers don't read. Because if you want to move your school forward, let's uncomplicate school improvement planning. Let's focus on purposeful action that will actually make a difference and do it collectively, unified in a unified manner across our entire school. What does it take to make change? It's a lot harder than you think. And I would argue right now that Westminster is probably between, I would say mostly around 3 to 4, and a 3 to 4, not quite to 5, and I'm going to explain why. How many of you golf? Okay, how many of you ski? How many of you fish, whatever? Think of it. I want you to think of something you like to do right now, and you want to do it better. Okay? I play baseball and I play golf, and whenever I go to a golf lesson, it is very disruptive because my golf teacher or coach will say, I want you to do this differently. So the first stage in doing something better is engaging it. And when you're engaging it, there's going to be a lot of struggles. You might do it well one day, one moment. You're not going to do it right the next because you're learning something new. The second level is implementation, when you actually start to do it and say, whoa, when I do it right, that's what happens. I know what quality or success looks like, what it feels like. The third is I get results with it. I start to see, for instance with golf, I start to see my scores, when I do it right, start to come down. Instead of a double or triple bogey, I'm only bogeying the hole. I'm starting to see some improvement. The fourth, I actually started to do it from one round of golf to the next. I actually can sustain it. I start to see my handicap come down. But through all those first four, I'm really thinking about how to do what I'm trying to do differently. There's a mechanical mindset. The fifth level is when it becomes embedded. When then I'm doing it without even thinking about doing it. And I get similar or better results time in and time again, and I'm not even thinking about it. It's become just the way I do things. For principals, this is really important. For superintendents, when you want to introduce change, you start to engage that level of change. You start to implement it and find where it's working, where it's not. You start to get results that say we're on the right path. Then you see it sustained over time. But as a school leader, you get to embeddedness when your teachers and your principals and your community say, oh, that's just the way we do things around here. But if they're still saying, that's because of the superintendent, or that's the principal's initiative, or that we're doing that because of some other decision-making process, you haven't achieved embeddedness. Embeddedness happens is that's who we are. That's just the way we do, and that's how we roll. It's harder than this diagram portrays it to be. It's one of the most difficult things, not just in schools, in any organizational structure and in learning anything new. The 5 stages of change that you have to go through. And I would argue Westminster is largely, in some aspects of it, there are 3, some aspects there are 4, and some aspects of it is 5. And I say that to all of you who are contemplating or ready to move in CBE. This isn't easy. It's going to take time. And it ties back to trust in the culture to be able to pursue this over time. So I said earlier, people constantly ask me, what's the difference between a good school and a school that's struggling? There are 3 factors. And it's the same thing for a system. And we looked at over 30,000 evaluations that we did to come up with this. One is a cohesive culture. There's a sense of ownership, security, and efficacy. And security is really critical within any organization. Security of all the stakeholders, that they feel secure in doing what they do, whatever that may be. Security in the learner, that he or she feels secure in learning. Security in the teacher to carry out the instructional activities to nurture and grow learning. Security in principals to lead their school each and every day. Security is a critical attribute. Efficacy, doing it with efficacy, getting to that level of embeddedness. Second, productive engagement. Without engagement, you can't have communities of trust. Without engagement, you can't pursue improvement because you're not unified as a culture. You're not all committed and engaging in that culture, contributing to that culture. And third, that leadership is collective. Don't look to a person to lead the way. Look to all of the key stakeholders. And kids have a role in this too, in the school system. Kids are leaders in the school system. They're leaders for their own learning. They're leaders for other kids' learning. They're leaders in your classrooms, in your schools, and in your communities. So too, all the way up the chain to board members. Leadership is a collective attribute. So I'm going to leave you with these, some key questions to explore. How do you lead a school towards a future where the journey is filled with unpredictability and uncertainty? And I suggested to you about scenario planning, but really think about, how am I going to lead my school towards an uncertain future? What's going to shape that journey? What's going to set us up to be agile and adaptive as we go along that journey? Are we providing instruction that includes, I'm not saying all elements of instruction, but what we have to make sure it includes is problem solving, knowledge application, conflict resolution, no matter the subject matter. These start to build the skills that are needed in our knowledge workers of the future. 3, how do you innovate our systems to ensure preparedness of our learners for their future? Innovation is really hard. It's disruptive. Don't try to disrupt and introduce a major change like CBE without ensuring you've invested in your culture, without ensuring that you've built a community of trust. Those factors have to be prerequisites to you introducing any major innovation. The same thing in your classroom. If you go back to your classroom today and all of a sudden want to change the rules in your class, all of a sudden you're just going to flip the switch, how many kids will be agile enough to immediately flip with you? Most of them will struggle because you've conditioned them to a certain way of coming into school each and every day and into your class. You can't flip the switch on them, but you can flip the switch if you engage them, you've committed and invested in trust with them, you have a healthy culture of learning in that classroom where kids can take risks in their learning. So you have to be really thoughtful about setting the stage no matter what the level of change you're seeking. Change is hard, but it's incredibly rewarding. I'll end with this. I think the fact that you're here at this conference says that you want to pursue something in the best interest of your kid. You want to be disruptive and innovate so that they're prepared for their future. I applaud you for that. I hope I raised some questions for you to think about as you go along that journey. As there's no better attribute of a great teacher than wanting more and better for their kids every day. Thank you.